In this position, black decides to trade these knights on e4. But it was a critical mistake that set in motion a series of moves that ultimately cost them the game. Now, it wasn't a mistake in the sense that they blundered a piece or immediately got checkmated, but they didn't understand a critical concept. We're going to talk about that in just a second. I'm actually going to show you this game from white's perspective so you can see how white took advantage of this mistake. Let's go ahead and jump back to the beginning, see how we ended up here and what exactly the problem with this knight trade actually was. I'm going to flip the board back to the beginning, and this is game number 13 in a series where we're going through this book, Logical Chess, move by move. Some of you are following along. If not, that's okay too. You're still going to learn a lot. Let's go ahead and just jump right in. So we have a French defense. Now against the French defense, there's really two main moves that are played quite often. You can push by and go into the advanced variation, or like in this case, you can play knight to c3 and just kind of go into the main line here. Okay, black can pin your knight if they want. They can play knight to f6, or they can trade. This is called the Rubinstein variation. And black's basically saying, look, I'm just going to relieve the tension in the center. Then I'm going to develop my pieces quickly and hopefully not have any problems. Okay, so right here, black plays the move knight to d7. Now, they're setting up to bring this knight out to f6. And you might wonder, well, why don't they just bring the knight out right away, right? Is there anything wrong with this? And there's nothing wrong with it, but you have to be really careful. And here's why. Because if white takes this, you have the decision. Now, do you really want to mess up your pawn structure and open up your king side? Probably not what most people are going to do. So they would have to recapture with the queen. But the queen now can become a target and can get into trouble. For example, knight to f3, bishop to d7 is a common maneuver, bringing the bishop to this diagonal like this. Bishop to d3, bishop to c6, and now the move bishop to g5. And what do you notice about black's queen? Well, that's correct. It's trapped. You can't go back here. You can't go here or here or here or here or here or here. It's just trapped. However, black has an idea. An idea is bishop takes f3, attacking the queen. And they're basically saying, look, if you take my queen now, I'm going to take your queen. And if you try to save your bishop, I'll save my bishop. And at the end of the day, black has 3 pieces and white only has 2. So black thinks they're basically winning a piece, right? Do you see the problem with that? What does white play instead? Instead of taking the queen, what does white play? Well, the answer is queen to d2, ignoring the fact that you just lost the knight because you really just care about defending your bishop because remember, the queen is trapped. Except it's not really trapped anymore because now the knight is no longer defending. So black says, thank you very much. Now I'm up a knight and a pawn. So why did white do that? The answer is because the queen is lined up here. You have a discovered attack, which means you move this with check, unleashes the discovered attack, and guess what? Black is losing their queen. Even if they play knight to c6, it doesn't actually defend because it's pinned, and white simply takes the queen. Okay, so at the end of the day, black loses the queen from a very tricky sequence of moves there. But that was just an example of what could happen if black immediately plays knight to f6. Okay, so black says, I don't really want to deal with that. Let me play knight to d7 first, so that now if I play here and white decides to take, I'll just be able to take back with my knight and avoid all that stuff that we just saw. Okay, let's keep going. Knight to f3, and black plays bishop e7. You could also just develop the knight. You're ready to do it. He decides to, play bishop e7 first. Not really a big deal. A little bit passive. There is one thing, though, that the book mentioned that I want to point out. This move b6, which looks very logical. Like, okay, you're going to bring the bishop here. Looks like a really nice diagonal for the bishop to put pressure on all these squares. However, after bishop to b5, bishop to b7, white now has a way to make black black pay for that move. What can white play? Well, if you get a chance to look at that, the move is knight to e5. And what white is doing is saying, look, if you're going to move the bishop away from the defense of this knight, I'm just going to attack it. And you can't defend it with this knight because I simply take, and then I'm just going to grab this for free. And what else can black do? Well, there's kind of 2 options. Number one, you can go back where you came from. That doesn't seem very, very good to move and have to go back. And it's not good because of this idea. Bishop g5. And after this happens, well, do you guys see the move for white? Knight to c6, and the queen is trapped. Look at that. What a wild queen trap. So this is the second queen trap that we've seen, which is pretty ironic, but it's it's weird opening. We're only on like move 7, right? 7 or 8, and the queen's getting trapped. Fascinating to me. So black doesn't want to do that. So they say, okay, look, I'll just at least take this free knight, even though I'm going to lose my knight. I get a knight too, right? But the problem is after this, white now has another really nice follow-up. If you want to pause, if you had a chance to look at that, there's almost a fork here, right? The problem is black would just take. And then you take back, and then they move the rook, and the game goes on. And yeah, I mean, yeah, the king is kind of in trouble, but it's not like that good. But what you can do instead is move here with your bishop, which actually forks these pieces. Black has to choose which one do they want to lose. And now if they take you, guess what? You recapture, and you do get the fork. So either way you look at it, you're going to be winning some material. Okay, so that was, just to summarize, that was just if black played b6, they would get into trouble along these light squares. Okay, so they don't do that. They played, bishop e7 like we saw, but I just wanted to show you some of those kind of interesting lines. All right, so let's keep going. Bishop to d3, knight comes out to f6, and queen to e2. Now, at first glance, queen to e2 is like, okay, why are we moving our queen instead of maybe developing a bishop or castling? It doesn't really look like the queen does a whole lot there, but I want you to pay attention because that actually is a very nice move. Okay, so let's just keep going and you'll see what I mean. If they try to, so whenever you have a cramped position like this as black, one of the things that usually makes sense is to trade some pieces. Because if you trade some pieces, it kind of clears things up, gives you more space to work with. It's usually a good thing. So what if black decided to try to take now? Well, watch what could have happened. Bishop takes e4. And after knight to f6, clearing the way for the pieces, white has a very nice tactic here. If you had a chance to look at that, the move is bishop takes b7, a wild-looking move. And the idea is that after they recapture, the queen, remember, the queen that was on e2 now jumps over to b5 with a fork. Okay, and you're going to get your bishop back, and you got a free pawn in the process. Now, Stockfish actually says, look, yes, black lost the pawn, but after queen d7, watch what Stockfish says. This is interesting, I thought. You take the bishop. Stockfish says, no problem, I'll castle. White says, okay, I'll castle. And now Stockfish says a5. Now, why is Stockfish suggesting the move a5? See if you guys can figure that out. Well, the reason is if white's not paying attention to some random move, the queen gets trapped. So the third queen trap that we've seen in this game, it's so funny, but look at this. The queen can't move anywhere, okay? So white has to say, okay, I have to move my queen. And then again, he gets attacked. They have to move their queen again. And then black just piles up the rooks on the open files. And Stockfish says black's position is actually not that bad. So I thought that was pretty interesting, even though you lose a pawn. Okay, but back to the game. Black didn't do that and instead decided to just castle. Okay, so here we go. White castles. And this is the critical moment. So if you remember at the start of the video, I'll flip back just for a second. This was the position that I presented to you from black's perspective. Okay, now we're looking at the same thing, but from white's perspective. And if you remember, the move that black decided to play was to trade the knight. Now, why is this a bad decision? Here's the general principle that you want to remember. Generally, when you trade into your opponent, which means you make the first move, like in this case, it allows them to recapture and also do something else. A lot of times when they recapture, another piece either comes into the game when it wasn't, or it moves a little bit further up the board and comes into a more aggressive position. And that's what we see here. Queen takes e4. White is able to not only recapture, but also create a battery and threaten checkmate. And some of you are probably thinking, yeah, but black's just going to play knight f6, attack the queen, defends the checkmate. Like, what's the big deal? It sets in motion this aggressiveness, right? Like white is now on the offensive all of a sudden. And you're going to see how that can be very dangerous. Imagine if black waited until white captured, then they would be able to bring one of their pieces forward with the momentum. Okay? And so that was, it seems subtle, but it actually was the critical mistake in this game that led to everything else that we're going to see in just a few moves. Well, several moves, but this was kind of the critical moment. Okay? So hopefully that makes sense. So knight takes e4, not really ideal for black. So white recaptures with the queen to create the battery. And like I mentioned, black plays knight to f6, which looks like a very nice move, right? You're gaining a tempo and you're defending the pawn to stop the checkmate. Okay, so what do you guys think white played here? Well, the move is queen to h4. And this is a really nice square for the queen. I have played this in some of my games, some of the openings that I like to play. I'll bring the queen out early intentionally, and I'll tuck it over here on h4. And the nice thing about h4, or if you're playing as black, it's h5 and attacking this way. But the nice thing is, whenever you have the bishop involved, you have that checkmate threat. And that's a really annoying threat for black to deal with, because if they ever move this knight, or if you attack the knight, you're always threatening to get rid of it and just checkmate them. And they have to be really, really careful. And a lot of times there's not an easy way to defend that. So that's what white gained from this. And it all started, remember, from that trade. Okay, so here we go. Black has to be very careful because of the checkmate threat. All right, so black says, well, let me play b6 and at least try to get my bad bishop into the game, put some pressure along this diagonal. So what do you guys think white played here? Well, yeah, that's bishop g5, right? Super logical move, makes a lot of sense. You want to checkmate? You can't because the knight's there. Let's get rid of the knight and we'll have checkmate. Now, of course, black is going to do something to stop this, but what do they have to do? Well, this is kind of another reason behind playing bishop g5. Even though we are threatening checkmate, at a deeper level, we're saying, look, if we can get black to push one of these pawns forward, you guys have heard this over and over as we've gone through this book, right? Why is that so good? They create weaknesses that they can't fix. They're long-term weaknesses. Once the pawns move forward, they can never move backwards. That's exactly what we see here. So black decides to go with g6. Now, I want to ask you, what if they would have played h6? Nice little moment to work on your tactics. What move should white play here? We've got a chance to look at that. The move is bishop takes f6. Now, normally you don't want to trade. Normally you don't want to trade when you're attacking. So why are we doing it here? Because there's a specific tactical reason. Queen to e4 is a fork. It's a fork because you're attacking the rook and you're also threatening checkmate at the same time. And black has to decide if they want to stop the checkmate or do they want to save the rook. They can't do both at the same time. Okay, so that's the idea. Like I said, normally you don't trade when you're attacking, but in this case, it's an exception. There's a tactic. So that's why black said, nope, I don't like the look of that. Let me play g6 instead. All right, what do you guys think white played here? All right, well, if you had a chance to look at that, the move is c4. Now, why would they play c4? See if you can figure out why they would play this move. All right, if you had a chance to think through that, maybe because they want to push d5, but also, and probably more importantly, they're stopping the move knight to d5. Okay, if you play a random move like rook e1, knight to d5 is pretty annoying for white because remember, you don't want to trade when you're attacking, but guess what? Now you have to. You have to because you can't move your bishop away. You lose your queen. If you move your queen, then black's going to just take here. There's no way to avoid the trades, and the knight nicely defends. And it's going to be hard for white to do something. Okay, so by playing c4, you stop knight to d5 because you simply just take the knight. So it's actually a move that prevents trades, which is why it's a nice move. Okay, so let me see. Black says bishop to b7, just putting the bishop on a good square. And here white plays a move that I think a lot of people watching this video would not play this move in their games, probably myself included. Okay, so what move do you think white played? And then we'll talk about why it's such a powerful move. All right, the move that they played is d5. Now, you might say, oh, well, they just played c4, so I'm not really surprised. But when you really look at it, 1, 2, 3, 4 pieces, white only has one defender. It doesn't look like it makes a lot of sense, right? The reason it's such a good move and the reason why white played it is because there's a hidden idea. And once you see the hidden idea, it makes so much sense. But until you see that idea, it's like, what are we doing here, right? So black takes, obviously, it looks like a free pawn. And on top of that, they're expecting that when you take back, they're going to take with the knight and defend the bishop. But white doesn't take back and instead plays what's called a zwischenzug move, or also known as an in-between move. So an in-between move is when your opponent expects you to do something, but you don't. You do something else instead, right? That's what black is expecting that white's going to take this, right? Like, why did you play d5? I guess they're going to take back. But no, white plays the move rook f to e1. This was the idea of playing d5. You wanted to open up the e file. Why? Because this bishop is kind of holding all the dark squares together. And if you can get rid of that guy, guess what? This bishop, this queen comes in, and it's all over for black's king. That was the whole point of d5. Very, very, very clever idea. Now, zwischenzug tactics are extremely powerful because they usually come as a surprise to your opponent. And speaking of zwischenzug tactics, in mid-July, I'm going to be opening up a brand new course. It's called Breaking 1500. And one of the modules in that course is all about tactics. And one of the lessons in that module deals specifically with zwischenzugs. So you're going to get lots of practice with this exact type of tactic. Okay, it's very, very powerful. You want to make sure you know it very well. And so that course, it's going to be a game changer if you're trying to get past 1500. So stay on the lookout for that. Like I said, coming in mid-July. All right, let's get back to the video. So rook f to e1, very, very powerful move. And as an example, if black just ignores what's going on here and just keeps taking, white's going to simply give up the rook. Because after this, they're busting through and you have no way to stop this, right? Like you could go here, but well, actually, let's make a better move for black. Let's say they go here. They're trying to put the pressure on here so you can't come in or they'll just take your bishop. It actually looks pretty good for black, right? No, because knight to g5 threatens checkmate. And the only way black can stop that is by pushing the pawn here, but now white has a brilliant finish. White to play and win. What do you guys think it is? The move is queen takes h5, because if the pawn takes, the bishop comes in for checkmate. This is amazing. Look at this. We've seen a pattern like this before in a previous game. It was black playing, but it's the same kind of idea. And it's just game over. There's nothing for black to do because you have to take the queen. If you don't take the queen, then you get checkmated this way. So brilliant stuff, okay? And that's kind of the idea here of rook f to e1 and ultimately what the idea of d5 was. All right, so I hope that makes sense. I know that was a lot. Very, very complicated move, but really, really nice if you understand the idea. Okay, so black at this point says, okay, clearly I have a problem on the dark squares. And so they play the move h6. And their idea is luring one of these pieces away to relieve some of the pressure here, which actually is not a bad idea. And I think they're probably hoping that white would take this way. And if they do that, it actually unleashes this move knight to e4 because now the bishop is attacking the queen. And all of a sudden, black goes on the offensive, gains some momentum, and black is somehow surviving, okay? However, white notices that and actually takes with the queen. Much better option, okay? And here we have, let me see, yeah, black plays the move knight to g4. Now, they could have also played knight to e4. And this is a good moment if you want to work on your tactics some more. What could white have done against knight to e4? This is a little bit complicated, but it's really satisfying if you're going to be able to solve this. So go ahead and take a minute, pause if you would like. All right, if you had a chance to think through that, the sequence here that white can do is trade the bishops, capture here, which is threatening the knight now, okay? So black says, all right, let me take to defend my knight. Then white trades again, and all of those trades were to set up this position right here so that white could sacrifice the rook. Why do they want to do that? Because after the queen comes in, knight to g5 is a fork. You either have to give up the queen or you have to get checkmated. You can't stop both, and white's just winning, okay? So nice little sequence there if black would have played knight to e4, okay? And I think there was one other move that they could try here, rook to e8. If you want to pause here, how can white finish off the game against this move? If you had a chance to look at that, the move is bishop takes g6. You're busting through, and now black has a problem, because if you go here, it's simply checkmate right away. And if you go in the corner, then there's another sacrifice followed by a fork, and you lose your queen. And so black's in trouble there as well. Okay, so all sorts of different sacrifices here that black has to watch out for. So they actually play a decent move. They play knight g4 instead. And knight g4 threatens the queen. So it doesn't really give white too much time. So what do you think white played here? Well, they actually just retreated the queen. And if you don't retreat and you try to do something like this, it turns out to just be a big trade, right? You lose a queen, you get a queen, you lose a piece, you get a piece. It doesn't really help white, okay? So queen h4 is a much better move because now you're threatening this, you save your queen, and black has to figure out what to do now, okay? So nice move there. Black says, okay, well, I'll just trade. And question for you guys now, which way should white recapture, with the knight or with the queen? All right, so that was an easy question, and the answer is with the knight. Why? Because we're attacking. We're attacking the king. We don't want to trade queens when we're attacking the king. Trade queens, then it's going to be much more difficult to get checkmate unless you have a very specific reason, right? So, of course, taking with the knight is the best, and it also threatens checkmate. So only move for black is knight to f6. Okay, you have to save your knight, you have to stop the checkmate, and so if they go back, save checkmate. And now white plays a move that I think is a tricky move for a lot of people to find, although it's not really that hard. But what do you think white played? All right, if you had a chance to look at that, the move is queen to h6. Now, the reason why I think that move is hard for people to find is because the queen was just there, and it was attacked, and you had to move back, and then some stuff happened, and now you're moving straight back to where you were. Why would we do that, right? Well, for one, it's not the same position. And the knight can no longer move like it could before and start, harassing you because you do have a checkmate threat now. And also, if let's just say you would have tried something like this, like rook e3 because you want to come up over here and checkmate. King g7 followed by rook h8, and all of a sudden black it actually has an advantage in the position, believe it or not, because this rook controls all of these weaknesses, forces a bunch of trades, and you just don't have anything now as white. Okay, so that's kind of an important idea, and guess what? Queen h6 just stops any ideas of the king moving up. Okay, so that's kind of part of it, and then also you get more pressure here, so black has to watch out for sacrifices. Okay, so very, very good move, queen to h6. All right, black now plays the move d4, and they want to stop rook e3 so that you can't come up and over like this. So it makes sense, also unleashes the bishop. I think that's a pretty nice move, and they probably didn't really see a follow-up here for white, and so that's why they played it. All right, critical moment. What move does white play? This is not an easy move to find. Do your best, and then we'll talk about it. All right, so the move that white played in this position is rook to e6. And it's a mind-boggling move because what are we doing? First of all, why do we want to go there? And then second of all, can we even go there because there's a pawn? So first things first, yes, we can go there because if the pawn takes us, we actually now can take here with the queen, which is more powerful because we keep this battery. And after king h8, you can go check, 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 and checkmate. All right, I know that was a long one, but it was all forced because of the checks, and it just wins. Okay, so that's why you can even go there in the first place, because this capture actually is bad for black. The second part is, why do we want to go there? Because the knight. If we get rid of the knight, then there's checkmate here on h7. Right, so that's why it's such a powerful move. So if you're thinking about this, the way you would want to think about it would be like, okay, I've got checkmate here, but the knight's a problem. Can I get rid of the knight? Well, I'd like to be able to go here and just take it. I can't because the pawn. Wait a second. If the pawn moves, then this guy, I could take with the queen, and then you would need to find from there the move or the following checkmate, which is mate in 5. Check, check, check. The whole point of that maneuver was to like get this for free with the check. It's an advanced one, so I don't feel bad if you didn't see it, but it was there. And that's kind of the thought process that you use. So very, very powerful move. Now, if you said in this position, instead of rook to e6, if you said bishop takes g6, that's also a good move. That's much more of a move that I would expect a lot of people maybe to find. The problem is it's just not, there's no checkmate. That's not checkmate because the knight defends. Yes, you can go here with the fork, but black just sacrifices. And what's amazing here is after queen d6, black is actually surviving somehow. It looks like we have a fork, but no, because rook f8 is this crazy move, and black's like, somehow black is like surviving. Right? It's amazing, but they are. So it's good, but it's not as good as rook to e6. Okay, so rook to e6 was played, and black played rook to e8, trying to give the king an escape square to maybe run this way. What's the finish for now for white? Well, if you had a chance to look at that, it's bishop takes g6 now, because after the capture, now it is checkmate. Okay, when the rook was on f8, there was no checkmate, but now it is, because if the king goes here, you simply go there. And if the king goes in the corner, you can now play here. There's no rook to sacrifice, right? That's what happened last time. You can't do that now. So it is checkmate. And so a couple other things that, let's see, that black could play. Queen to d7, trying to defend, doesn't really help you. Check, checkmate. And then also one other move here. If you took this with the pawn, also doesn't help. Bishop f7 is still checkmate. Okay, so really, really nice game. And just as a reminder, guys, all of this started from a simple decision going all the way back here. Black decided to trade, which allowed white to recapture with the threat And they were on the defensive essentially ever since then. Had to defend. Now you have a different threat that you have to worry about, right? And then here comes the bishop. Okay, you got to deal with that. And then here comes the pawn. Didn't even realize that this was the threat. And then here comes the rook. Okay, now you got to deal with that. And then here comes the queen. Okay, so you try to do that, but wait a second. Here's the queen again. And then here comes the... they just never had a chance. Never had a chance, right? And white kept keeping up the pressure. And really, really nice game. That was a fun one for me. I enjoyed that, and I hope you guys did too. Let's go ahead and jump into questions from last time. All right, first question from last time from Mizume3452. So the way to get through the defense is to rely on an opponent's mistake. And what do I do if my opponent is literally doing nothing? So I think there was a little bit of sarcasm in this question, but it's okay because it's actually a good question. So I said, how do you destroy the King's Indian setup, right? And then we saw how white made a mistake. So here's the deal. First of all, you have to understand that chess is a draw. I think Hikaru Nakamura said this. Chess is a draw. And he's right. If both players play perfectly, it's going to be a draw. Pretty much every time. I mean, sometimes when like two computers play, like somebody wins, but even that, there's like a mistake that was made. Like, if everybody plays perfect, it's a draw. The only way you win chess games is when your opponents make a mistake. So you're never going to play somebody who's just playing perfect unless they're cheating, right? So yes, they made a mistake. You have to know how to capitalize on it. And I'm not trying to say that like, here's something that you can do that even if your opponent plays perfectly, you're going to win every single game. Like, no, you're never going to be able to do that. You have to learn how to capitalize on their mistakes. So this was a good example of like a mistake that somebody made and you capitalized on it. Now that being said, there are things that you can do that encourage them to make mistakes, right? Like in this game that we looked at from last time, black decided to put the bishop on g4, kind of knowing that like a lot of players are going to play h3 to chase that away. And then they put their queen on d7, kind of knowing that a lot of players might not really pay attention here, which they didn't. And guess what? Now they won the pawn. So they did some things that led to this happening. And then, of course, yes, white made the big mistake by giving up the bishop, but that's part of chess, right? Yeah, you have to capitalize on opponent's mistakes. So hope that makes sense. Okay, next question from Sumathad P7587. I mentioned that white is totally fine after not getting the pawn back and that this was the big mistake. And they said that the big mistake was actually not playing king h2 earlier. Okay, so let me explain the question. So they're basically saying that this was the big mistake by them not like defending their pawn right here. I don't necessarily think so, and here's why. So Stockfish, I mean, I'm using Stockfish by the way. Stockfish basically said, look, it's pretty equal. This is fine, it's still pretty equal. This is fine, it's still pretty equal. Stockfish says nothing has changed in my evaluation of the position, even though white loses a pawn. Why is that? Because it comes at a cost. Black has to give up the bishop pair, and has to give up the bishop that counters this bishop, which means if white makes a decision to just leave this bishop, black has no way to really counter this guy. And Stockfish says, look, that's a trade-off, and I think this is totally fine. After a move like knight to c5, if you do this, let's just say, white has total compensation for the pawn that they lost. Yes, they lost a pawn, but they have the bishop pair, and the bishops are on an open board and controlling a lot of stuff. And Stockfish says it's just an equal position. So it really wasn't that bad for white, even though they lost a pawn. There's other things that you can have in exchange for that. Really, the big mistake happened right here. This is when Stockfish goes, oh, yep, that's a big problem, right? And you could see it because even though they get the pawn back, now the king is super weak. So it's not always about the material of like a pawn. It's sometimes there's other things that can trade off. And hopefully that makes sense. So good questions. But yeah, I'll see you guys in the next episode. Stay on the lookout for the new course, Breaking 1500. It's coming in mid-July, and I'm super excited. It's gonna be great. So I'll see you guys there real soon. Stay sharp, play smart, and take care.